Hello everyone, this is Nina Chef and today we're going to Russia. I will tell you about the most iconic period in the history of Russian painting. While Impressionism was breaking the code of the art world in France, Russia was experiencing its own, no less significant revolution, carried out by 14 great Russian artists who founded the Peredvizhniki movement, which marked the beginning of the golden age of Russian painting. Just like in France, in Russia for many years everything was governed by academicism, only in our case under the watchful supervision of the Imperial Academy of Arts. In the early 1860s, Russia began the era of Alexander II's great reforms. This incredible man completely changed the face of Russia by carrying out extremely painful but long overdue reforms. In a country where by that time slavery still existed, called serfdom, he abolished serfdom. In 1861, he carried out the Zemstvo reform and began modernizing all other spheres of state life, including the Imperial Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg. It should be noted that by that time, the artistic environment in Russia had developed exactly the same situation as in France. Young and talented artists were yearning for freedom, which was strictly suppressed by the Academy. Classicism and Academicism prevailed in Russia. And this meant that only the depiction of something sublime, battle scenes, mythological or religious subjects was considered true art. Depicting real life or realism in paintings was considered unworthy, mundane, and too down to earth. Why waste time on what we all see every day anyway? The peasants' severe poverty and backwardness sparked a new movement among the Russian intelligentsia called Narodnichestvo. Its idea was that Russian culture depended too much on the West, practically copying it, as did the intelligentsia. In order to remember its roots and gain its own identity, it must get closer to the people, understand their pain, and by interacting with them, enrich itself culturally. The people, workers, and peasants, as the largest, grassroots, but driving force of Russia, began to be seen not as something unworthy, but as part of the culture and strength of the Russian people, as a source of cultural identity. Academy of Arts. However, it refused to discuss populism, insisting on using images and scenes that countless artists had already painted many times. Every year, the Academy held a competition among graduates for the Grand Gold Medal. The students of the Academy had to paint a picture on a given subject. Only the most talented students, who had already received the small gold medal, were allowed to participate in the competition. For success in drawing, winning the competition and receiving the Grand Gold Medal awarded a magnificent prize. A full 3-year fellowship in Italy, an overseas internship funded by the government, paying 1,500 rubles annually. For comparison, the other students received the 10th rank and could enter service with a salary of 135 rubles a year. In other words, winning the competition provided invaluable opportunities for any young and ambitious artist. That makes the real rebellion that took place during the competition all the more interesting for us, in 1863. Exactly in the same year when the future Impressionists met in France, an Edouard Manet exhibited his scandalous painting Luncheon on the Grass at the Paris Salon. I talk about this in the video about Edouard Manet and Impressionism. Be sure to watch it. That year, the Imperial Academy of Arts celebrated its 100th anniversary and 14 academicians were admitted to the competition. They were told to paint The Feast of Volga, another Scandinavian-themed piece. It was planned that they would be isolated for 24 hours to complete a sketch which would then be either approved or rejected for the final work. However, the young medalists, having absorbed the ideas of populism like a sponge, asked to be allowed to choose their own subject and to paint about real life. They received an indignant refusal from the academicians, so all 14 withdrew from the competition in protest of the Academy's centuries-old rules. The young artists scandalously disrupted the competition, and this shocking act became known as the Revolt of the 14. However, after leaving the competition, the artists were also ordered to vacate their places in the Academy's dormitory, which also provided them with studios. With nowhere else to go, they chose to face life's challenges together and rent an apartment. That year, Chernyshevsky's popular book What is to be Done was published, depicting life and organization in a sewing cooperative. And inspired by the book, the young rebels come up with the idea to organize the first artists' cooperative in Russian history. They also create the Cooperative's charter, requiring everyone to contribute 10% of sales to the treasury. The main thing is to have no ties at all to the hated academy. Ivan Nikolaevich Kramskoy is selected as the Cooperative's head, main ideologist, and strongest advocate for independence from the academy. Initially it was tough, but over time, the talented artist received more commissions, and within a few years, the Cooperative became a successful business. They moved to the very center of Moscow and even buy themselves a camera, which allowed them to take portraits of the imperial family. These portraits were in great demand and became a good source of income. After 5 years, the Cooperative's capital hit 10,000 rubles, marking the Russian art world's first independent financial success of this kind. Previously, artists couldn't imagine acting without the Academy of Arts, but the first step is always the hardest. Ordinary greed undermined the organization. Not all artists were equally successful, and those who earned well found it unfair to support the others, so they started hiding their income, which greatly angered their less successful colleagues. In 2018 and in 1870, something outrageous happened. Dmitriev Orenbursky secretly got academy support and arranged a 3-year pension in Italy for himself. When he found out about this, Kramskoy demanded that the traitor be expelled from the Artel, but since the Artel would also lose the income of an extremely successful artist, no one except Kramskoy supported this idea. Angry at his fellow Artel members' lack of principles, Kramskoy leaves, and without him, the Artel soon dissolves. A few years before leaving the Artel, Kramskoy and Akazia organized their first vernissage in Nizhny Novgorod, which unexpectedly proved successful. And the idea that art can be exhibited and sold not only in the capitals but throughout all of Russia takes hold of the artist and his associates. Meanwhile, populism and critical realism grew stronger, urging a move away from lofty yet soulless topics unrelated to real life. Pay attention to people's lives and the world around them. The most authentic people lived in the provinces. That's why artists came up with the idea of bringing art directly to the eyes of their main and immeasurably vast audience living all across Russia. And they decided to organize a traveling exhibition of works of art, which would travel through the cities of Russia, and introduce its people to the most advanced ideas in painting. The very essence of the exhibition gave rise to the name of the organization responsible for this bold experiment, the Association of Traveling Art Exhibitions. All its members would soon be called Peredvizhniki, 15 in total, though not all came from the Artel. The constellation of these names will amaze you. Vasily Perov, who at that time was 36 years old, Alexei Savrasov, 40 years old Shishkin, 38 years old Ilya Repin, 26 years old Nikolai Gay, 39 years old Vasily Polenov, 26 years old. Viktor Vasnetsov was the youngest, 22 years old, and his brother Apollinary Vasnetsov, 37 years old, Vasily Surikov, 23 years old, Arkhip Quinji, 28 years old, Vladimir Makovsky, 24 years old, and Konstantin Makovsky, 31 years old. And of course Ivan Kramskoy, he was 33 years old. Later, Isaac Levitan would join them, who was only 10 years old when the association was founded, and Valentin Serov, who was just 5 at the time. We will definitely discuss the work of the most outstanding artists. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The organization's charter is being drafted, considering all mistakes from the Artel. Under the charter, all decisions require a vote. Instead of 10% like in the Artel, only 5% of the artist's earnings go to the common fund, along with ticket sale income. The mission of the association states, the association aims to organize traveling art exhibitions in all cities of the empire in order to give people in the provinces the opportunity to become familiar with Russian art, to foster a love for art, and to make it easier for artists to sell their works. In fact, the last financial issue was listed first in all the drafts, but later it was moved down. It would be more accurate to call these traveling exhibitions an exhibition fair, since the association's main goal as a cooperative was to sell paintings and profit from ticket sales. And the lofty mission successfully and organically gave this enterprise meaning. The association was no longer seen as a rebellion. They aimed to make it an official commercial and creative group. All required documents were submitted, and the community status and charter were registered with government authorities. Each association member had to paint at least one picture annually for the exhibition, with Russia in all its often grim diversity as the theme. According to the artist's idea, depicting the real, true life of the country and not some Greek gods whom uneducated Russia didn't even know about, was supposed to resonate with recognition in the hearts of provincial residents who had never encountered art before. A simple journey from St. Petersburg to Moscow by horse would take 5 days back then, and getting to Kiev would take a week and a half. That's why metropolitan art almost never reached the outskirts, and this business and cultural idea seemed quite workable. The first exhibition opened in 1871 in St. Petersburg at the Tolyatti Academy of Arts. Admission was 20 kopecks except Mondays when it was 1 ruble. A total of 80 works were exhibited there, and all of them were different from what the Academy usually showed. There were no battle scenes or Greek myths at the exhibition. Instead, the paintings offered a glimpse into real, authentic Russia, showing both its strengths and weaknesses. Astonished viewers and critics who had never seen anything like this were delighted by the painting's novelty and sincerity. Initially, they believed the Academy had organized the exhibition. All newspapers published praising articles, and Petersburg residents flocked to see the novelty. A highlight of the exhibition was Savrasov's well-known painting The Rooks Have Come Back, which was displayed for the first time. Even before the exhibition started, a single patron bought 46 works, half the exhibition. But more on that a little later. The first exhibition earned the association 4,000 rubles, just 5% from sales and ticket proceeds. For comparison, the total income from the Academy's exhibitions barely reached 5,000 rubles, and the artists themselves received nothing from it. Everything went to the imperial treasury. In other words, the startup was a success. The exhibition was held 3 more times in the Academy building. Soon, the academicians, feeling threatened by competition and declining visitors, distanced themselves from the Peredvizhniki and banned their exhibitions from their building. They hoped this would sober up the public, but it was too late. In 4 years, the Peredvizhniki had become famous throughout the country, and the exhibition simply moved to Moscow and then on to Kiev and Kharkiv. And in these cities, the Peredvizhniki had no competition at all. Each visit from St. Petersburg sparked excitement, and the provincial elite felt obliged to attend, even if they understood nothing. In art, attending the exhibition lines the association's pockets. The charter stated that at year's end, all Peredvizhniki got dividends and the capital was invested in profitable ventures to grow. The association became not just a community, but also an extremely successful commercial enterprise, the first in Russian history to be independent from the Academy and at the same time financially successful. And this was very important, because it allowed the Peredvizhniki not to worry about the financial side of things, not to think about whether their painting would be bought if they allowed themselves a childish approach or a questionable subject, but to paint what and how their soul desired. If in France the Impressionists had to wait 30 years before financial success came to them, the Peredvizhniki gained financial freedom almost immediately. And this dramatically influenced the boldness and scale of the canvases, which now make up the golden fund of Russian painting. It's important to note that during these years after Europe, Russia experienced a full industrial revolution, with the country rapidly filling with new technologies, factories, manufactories, and especially railroads. In addition to the emergence of an incredibly wealthy class of merchant industrialists, many of whom would become patrons and the reason for the financial success of artists. The Industrial Revolution and railroads made it possible for the first time in history to safely transport paintings by train instead of dragging delicate frames through the mud on a cart. In the provinces, local merchants and nobles were snapping up paintings from the capital like hotcakes. To the provincials' disappointment, the best paintings arrived already marked sold. Usually, before sales started, the paintings were bought by Pavel Mikhailovich Tretyakov, a Russian magnate, philanthropist, and Russian art collector. He had close ties to the association and could view each new collection first. He was often criticized for buying masterpieces of Russian art for cheap, and in a way, that was true. On average, he acquired paintings for only 500 rubles. But thanks to the sheer volume, he became the largest and most important sponsor of the Peredvizhniki. At the time the Peredvizhniki Society was founded, he was already 38 years old. He had inherited and very successfully developed the business of weaving and spinning manufactories. He had been buying works of art for 20 years already, and since the founding of the society, his collection began to grow incredibly fast, by 40 to 50 paintings a year. And in 1874, right in the center of Moscow, he built a gallery for his growing collection, which he would open to the public in 1881. He always intended to donate his collection to the city, and he did. In 1892, the gallery was named the City Art Gallery of Pavel and Sergei Mikhailovich Tretyakov, and he himself was awarded the title of Honorary Citizen of Moscow. And the second major client of the association was Emperor Alexander II himself, whose collection, largely consisting of paintings by the Peredvizhniki, you can now admire at the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. The association lasted for almost 50 years until 1923, outliving all the czars, the Academy, which was abolished in 1918, both revolutions in Russia and the First World War. The association held 47 traveling exhibitions in 12 Russian cities during its existence. Had never seen contemporary Russian art before? Meanwhile, exhibitions of unsold paintings from past years toured smaller towns and, by the 20th century, even reached remote villages. Here are just a few masterpieces undoubtedly familiar to you that were first shown to the public at the Peredvizhniki exhibitions. I will definitely tell you more about many of them, so don't forget to subscribe. The Peredvizhniki Society became the starting point of free thought in religious painting and laid the foundation for independent artistic associations, which would soon make Russian artistic thought one of the most flourishing in Europe. Abramsovsky Circle, Blue Rose, Jack of Diamonds, Supremus, Utvrditeli Novogo Iskustva, and many others. The society carried out exactly the same revolution as the Impressionists did in France, overthrowing the total hegemony of Academicism and opening up opportunities, especially financial ones, for those who craved experimentation. Driven by the same motives as the Impressionists, they took a different path, focusing on meaning rather than painting technique. Though they later adopted many Impressionist ideas, the originality of Russian painting became its hallmark and produced remarkable artists. Korovin, Goncharova, Serebriakova, Kandinsky, Malevich. And we will talk about all of them with you very soon. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Bye everyone.